Hello, midnight wanderers, and welcome to Dreadvane. This is where ancient whispers rise beneath a crimson sky, carrying you softly into the world of dreams and shadows. Before tonight's haunting story begins, tell me, what corner of the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if the silence of the night calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll never miss the moon's next dark secret. I've been wanting to tell this story for a long time because, even years later, it still bothers me in a way I can't fully explain. It's not the kind of story where something jumps out at you or where there's some dramatic horror movie ending. Honestly, what makes it unsettling is how simple it was. The whole thing lasted only a few moments, but it completely changed the way I think about certain things. Before I get into it, I should explain something about myself. I've never really been the kind of person who believes in ghosts, paranormal activity, haunted houses, or anything like that. Even when I was younger, those stories always felt exaggerated or fake to me. I was the person who tried to come up with logical explanations for everything. Strange noise in the house, pipes, shadow in the hallway, bad lighting, moving objects. Somebody forgot where they put them. That's just how my brain worked. And honestly, it still does. Which is exactly why this experience stayed with me for so many years. At the time, my mom worked in real estate. Part of her job involved checking out homes before showing them to clients. Sometimes she'd visit houses alone just to inspect the property, get familiar with the layout, or make sure everything looked presentable before bringing potential buyers through. Most of the time she went alone. But occasionally, especially if she was making a quick stop somewhere, she'd take me with her. Usually, I enjoyed going. As a kid, exploring random houses felt interesting, especially older ones. Every place had its own atmosphere, its own smell, and its own weird little details. Then one day, a particular house came onto the market. And apparently, other agents already had a reputation for talking about it. People kept saying the place was haunted. Naturally, my mom didn't really believe that either. But she thought the rumors were amusing enough that she decided to bring me along when she went to check it out. The moment we arrived, I remember immediately understanding why people thought the place looked creepy. The house itself was old and covered almost entirely in vines. Thick vines climbed up the walls and wrapped around parts of the windows, making the entire place look abandoned, even though it technically wasn't. Still, old houses sometimes look like that. So at first, it didn't seem like a big deal. We went inside. The interior had that familiar smell old, empty houses often have. Dusty, stale air mixed with old wood and furniture. The house was still furnished, which somehow always makes empty homes feel stranger because it feels like people should still be living there. At first, everything seemed fairly normal. We walked through the first floor without noticing anything unusual. Then one detail caught my attention. In one of the rooms sat an old box television, one of those bulky TVs from years ago, and it was still on, playing a black and white World War II documentary. I remember the glow from the television, making the room feel strangely gloomy. The sound was low and crackly, and the combination of the old house and that old documentary somehow made the atmosphere feel heavier. Still, nothing genuinely scary had happened. Just an uncomfortable vibe. Eventually, we headed upstairs. The second floor layout was simple. A long hallway stretched down the center with a few bedrooms branching off along the sides. The first bedroom looked normal enough. Nothing unusual there. Then we reached the second room, and immediately both of us paused. The entire room was filled with stuffed animals. toy stuffed animals, real stuffed animals, taxidermy, mounted deer heads, preserved animals, glass eyes staring from shelves and walls. The whole room felt bizarre and deeply uncomfortable almost instantly. I remember feeling eager to leave that room the moment we entered it. But despite how creepy it looked, everything inside appeared orderly. Nothing seemed disturbed, nothing looked out of place, and importantly, there was definitely no chair sitting in the middle of the room. That detail matters, because we would have noticed it immediately. The room wasn't large enough to miss something like that. After only a short look around, we moved on to the final bedroom farther down the hallway. That room seemed completely normal too. At that point, we had pretty much finished looking upstairs and started heading back toward the staircase. Then something happened that stopped both of us cold. As we walked back past the second room, the taxidermy room, I glanced inside one more time and instantly froze. There was now a chair sitting directly in the middle of the room, not pushed against a wall, not partly hidden somewhere, directly in the center, perfectly positioned as if someone had intentionally placed it there. I remember physically stopping mid-step. My mom noticed immediately too, because I think I just stared silently into the room for several seconds. We both knew that chair had not been there before. There was absolutely no way. We had walked fully into that room earlier, looked around, and moved through the space freely. If the chair had been sitting there before, we would have literally bumped into it. But now there it was, completely still, right in the middle of the floor. The strangest part wasn't even the chair itself. It was the feeling that came with seeing it. This immediate realization that something about the situation made absolutely no sense. My mom and I had stayed together the entire time. Neither of us wandered off alone. Nobody else had entered the house. We would have heard footsteps if someone had come upstairs because the house creaked loudly when we walked through it. And yet, somehow the room had changed between the first time we saw it and the second, without either of us seeing it happen. I remember looking at my mom, waiting for her to explain it logically. Instead, she just quietly said something like, "Let's go." And we left the house pretty quickly after that. Neither of us wanted to stay there any longer. What bothered me afterward wasn't fear exactly. It was confusion. I replayed the situation in my head over and over, trying to find some normal explanation. Maybe we somehow overlooked the chair earlier. Maybe lighting made us miss it. Maybe our memory got mixed up. But none of those explanations fully worked, because both of us remembered the room clearly, and both of us were certain the chair had not been there before. That's why the experience stayed with me. Not because it proved ghosts exist, not because I suddenly became deeply superstitious afterward, but because for once, I experienced something I genuinely couldn't explain logically. And that bothered me more than if something obviously supernatural had happened. A floating object or shadowy figure would almost be easier to dismiss somehow. But a simple chair appearing where it absolutely should not have been, that felt harder to process. Over the years, I tried not to think too much about it. Then something else made the story even stranger. In the years after we visited that house, it changed owners multiple times. 5 or 6, if I remember correctly. And according to people familiar with the area, many of those homeowners reported strange experiences while living there. Nothing dramatic, mostly small things. Odd noises, objects moving, the constant feeling that someone else was inside the house. A few apparently became so uncomfortable they moved out fairly quickly. Now logically, maybe those stories only spread because of the house's reputation. Maybe once people heard it was haunted, they started interpreting ordinary events differently. That absolutely happens. But even knowing that, I still think back to that room sometimes. The stuffed animals staring silently from the walls, the old television downstairs playing black and white war footage, and that chair sitting perfectly in the center of the room where neither of us remembered seeing it before. It's still one of the only experiences in my life where I genuinely have no explanation. And honestly, I think not having an explanation is exactly what makes it so unsettling even now. This is a story I've wanted to share for a very long time. Even now, years later, it still affects me deeply. There are moments from that period of my life that I can remember with perfect clarity. And sometimes thinking about them still gives me chills. I know some people probably won't believe parts of this story, and honestly, I understand why. Before all of this happened, I probably wouldn't have believed it either. But everything I'm about to tell you is true. And to this day, I still can't look at blackbirds the same way again. Back when I was 19 years old, I met a girl and we fell in love quickly. Like a lot of young couples, we jumped into adulthood before we were fully prepared for it. We had 2 beautiful daughters together. And even though we struggled financially, we tried our best to build a life together. She came from a native background and had grown up on a reserve before moving to the city to live with me. Family meant everything to her, and over time I became very close with many of her relatives too. By 2005, we were renting a small house together and trying to make things work. Around that time, her younger brother Clinton came to stay with us for a couple of weeks. He was 16 years old. Honestly, just a really good kid. Quiet, respectful, and easy to get along with. He loved joking around with the kids and always tried to help out wherever he could. Nothing about him ever gave me a bad feeling. Then one night, something happened that I still think about all the time. Everyone in the house had gone to sleep. Sometime during the night, I suddenly woke up because I heard strange noises coming from the living room where Clinton was sleeping on the couch. At first, I thought maybe he was having a nightmare. But when I walked into the room, what I saw immediately unsettled me. He was still asleep. His eyes were closed, but he had sat upright on the couch and was making these deep, horrifying sounds that honestly did not sound human. The closest thing I can compare it to is a wolf howling. Not playful, not fake. Raw and primitive sounding. I had never heard noises like that come from a person before. The sound echoed through the dark house in a way that instantly made my skin crawl. I remember just standing there frozen for a few seconds, watching him. Then eventually, the sound stopped, and he laid back down, still asleep. At the time, I tried brushing it off as some strange dream or sleep-talking episode. But deep down, something about it disturbed me badly. A couple days later, Clinton surprised us by inviting all of us out to dinner at the Keg. For anyone who knows the restaurant, it's not exactly cheap. And this was a 16-year-old kid insisting on paying for everybody. I remember sitting there during dinner feeling strangely emotional without fully understanding why, because the entire night felt oddly meaningful somehow. Clinton seemed quieter than normal. Not sad exactly, just different. At the time, I didn't think much of it beyond finding it unusual that someone his age wanted to spend his money taking us all out for a nice dinner. The next morning, Clinton was gone. At first, we assumed he had headed back toward the reserve early. Then the phone call came. He had been killed in a car accident on the drive back. I still remember the silence in the house after hearing the news. That kind of silence where nobody really knows what to say. My girlfriend completely broke down. And honestly, so did I. He had just been with us, laughing, talking, taking us out for dinner, and suddenly he was gone forever. Afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about that night on the couch, those animal-like sounds he made while sleeping. And somehow, my mind connected it all together in a way I couldn't explain logically. It felt like his spirit already knew, like some part of him understood he was leaving. Even the dinner suddenly felt different in my memory afterward, like it had been his goodbye to us without any of us realizing it. At Clinton's funeral, his older brother Joe took the loss especially hard. I remember watching him completely fall apart emotionally, crying uncontrollably, refusing to leave the gravesite afterward. At one point, he hugged the tombstone and just stayed there for a long time. The grief in that moment felt unbearable. Later that evening, the family held a traditional fire gathering in Clinton's honor. Everyone sat around sharing stories about him, laughing, crying, remembering him. At some point during the gathering, I looked up into the sky, and I noticed a single black crow circling slowly above the fire. At first, that doesn't sound strange, but what stood out to me was that there were no other birds anywhere. I remember specifically scanning the sky because something about that lone black bird caught my attention immediately. Just one bird circling over and over above the fire. Then it disappeared into the darkness. About a month later, tragedy struck again. My girlfriend and I were home when the phone rang. Her older brother Joe had also been killed in a car accident near the reserve, the exact same way Clinton died. At that point, the entire family was emotionally destroyed. Losing one child is unimaginable. Losing two within weeks felt almost impossible to process. At Joe's funeral, I noticed something that deeply unsettled me. My girlfriend stood near the gravestone the exact same way Joe had stood beside Clinton's, almost like history repeating itself. Then later, during the fire gathering for Joe, I looked up again. This time there were two black birds circling above the fire. Not one, two. And once again, they were the only birds visible anywhere in the sky. I remember getting this cold feeling in my stomach when I saw them. At that point, it no longer felt coincidental to me. A couple months later, things became even stranger. One morning, my girlfriend woke up visibly shaken after having a nightmare. She told me she dreamed our house caught fire and all of us died inside. By then, she had become deeply superstitious about everything happening around her family. She genuinely believed there was some kind of curse following them. The dream terrified her enough that she decided to take the kids and stay at a friend's place for a few nights. While she was gone, I ran into an old friend named Tim. We both loved music, so we decided to hang out at my place and jam for a while since nobody else was home. We stayed up late playing music before eventually crashing for the night. The next morning, I went to work like normal. About an hour later, I got a phone call. My house was on fire. I rushed back immediately. And when I arrived, it honestly looked like something out of a movie. Police tape everywhere, fire trucks, smoke still rising into the air. The house was completely destroyed, burned almost beyond recognition. I remember standing there staring at the wreckage, realizing one terrifying thing. If my girlfriend and daughters had stayed there that night, there's almost no doubt in my mind they would have died. That realization shook me deeply. Not long after the fire, my relationship with my girlfriend eventually fell apart under the weight of everything that had happened. We separated. I got custody of our daughters, and she moved back to the reserve to be closer to her family. Eventually, I met someone new and remarried. Life slowly moved forward, even though the grief from everything that happened never fully disappeared. Then Christmas 2007 arrived. My ex-girlfriend called me asking if she could take the children for the Christmas break. I still remember that phone call clearly. She was at work while talking to me, but something about her voice felt wrong. It sounded shaky, sad, heavy somehow. At the time, I couldn't explain why it affected me so much. Then, about an hour later, the phone rang again. This time it was her sister crying hysterically. My ex-girlfriend had been killed in a car accident on her way home from work. A drunk driver hit the vehicle. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was the only person killed. I can honestly say telling my daughters their mother had died was the hardest moment of my entire life. Nothing else even comes close. At her funeral, while leaving the reserve afterward, I suddenly felt this overwhelming certainty wash over me. I knew what I was going to see before I even looked. 3 black birds. I looked up, and there they were. 3 black birds circling overhead together. And for the first time in years, instead of fear, I felt calm. It felt like her and her brothers were finally together somehow. Years later, during the trial for the drunk driver, local newspapers constantly printed stories about the case. One night, my new wife and I were talking about one of the articles while lying in bed. I remember expressing concern and sadness about everything surrounding the trial. At one point, my wife made an insensitive comment about my ex-girlfriend. She said she didn't understand why I still cared so much because my ex had been difficult to me sometimes. The next morning, I walked outside toward my car and stopped dead in my tracks. The entire car was covered in bird droppings. Not a little, not normal amounts. I mean completely covered. It honestly looked like dozens of birds had targeted only my car during the night. What made it stranger was the area we lived in barely even had birds around regularly. No large trees nearby, no signs of flocks anywhere else, and none of the neighboring cars had anything on them. Only mine. Standing there looking at it, I immediately thought of her. And somehow, instead of fear, I almost laughed. Because in that moment, it genuinely felt like a message. Like she had heard what was said. I know how crazy all of this sounds. Maybe every single thing has a logical explanation. Maybe grief simply made me connect unrelated events together. Maybe the birds were coincidence. Maybe all of it was coincidence. But after living through all those events one after another, it stopped feeling random to me. Now, whenever I see black birds circling overhead, I still think about that family. About Clinton, Joe, my daughter's mother, and everything that happened during those years. I don't necessarily think the birds themselves are supernatural, but I do believe sometimes life gives us symbols that become deeply personal. And once something carries enough emotion and pain attached to it, it changes forever in your mind. For me, blackbirds will always mean something more now. And I think they always will. One summer while I was home from college, I got a job working as a morning cleaner at a local movie theater with a couple of my friends. At first, it sounded like a pretty easy job. We worked strange hours, but the pay was decent for college students, and most of the shift involved cleaning theaters while listening to music on our iPods. The theater itself was fairly new at the time, built sometime in the early 1990s. It had 3 huge screen rooms, several medium-sized theaters, and a few smaller screening rooms. During the day, the place felt normal enough. Families came in for movies, teenagers hung around the arcade area, and the smell of popcorn filled the lobby constantly. But at 4 in the morning, that same building felt completely different. Our shift started at 4 a.m., and ended around 10 a.m. The theater sat in a weird isolated area outside town, surrounded by empty roads and undeveloped land. Before the shopping area and theater were built, the land had mostly been wetlands and farmland, with some of it owned by a nearby nature center. Getting there that early always felt eerie. The roads were empty. Everything outside was dark and silent. And because only 2 or 3 cleaners usually worked a shift, you spent most of your time completely alone somewhere inside the building. For the first couple of weeks, nothing unusual happened. The work itself was repetitive. Sweep the theaters, throw away cups and popcorn containers, clean spills, vacuum floors, wipe seats down. Sometimes we'd run into the day shift workers later in the morning and pass along maintenance problems or things management wanted fixed. Then one morning, my manager asked me something strange. He wanted to know if any of us had noticed the front doors unlocked when we arrived before opening. I told him no. That's when he casually started explaining something that completely changed how I felt about the theater. Apparently, customers, mostly women, had been complaining for months about a tall man following them through the building. Not a normal guy. A very tall man. Around 7 feet tall, according to most descriptions. Always wearing a black suit and a bowler hat. Customers claimed he followed them from theater to theater slowly and silently. Some women even reported him following them toward the bathrooms before disappearing completely. A few people had become so frightened they called the police. But whenever employees or officers searched the building, nobody was ever found. The teenage employees had started calling him the Tall Man. Even some male employees occasionally claimed to catch glimpses of him slipping into theaters, only for him to vanish by the time anyone followed. At the time, I thought it was just another creepy workplace story employees told each other to make boring shifts more interesting. Then I learned about Theater 5. The theater had 12 screening rooms total, but everybody hated Theater 5 specifically. Nobody wanted to clean it. At first, I didn't understand why my boss kept assigning it to me almost every shift. I figured it was because I was new. But eventually, I realized even the manager avoided that room whenever possible. Theater 5 sat farther back than the others behind the lobby bathrooms. To reach it, you had to walk down this long, isolated hallway, away from the rest of the building. At 4 in the morning, that hallway felt endless. And because the theater sat so far away from the others, you often couldn't hear your co-workers at all while cleaning there. People constantly complained about strange things happening inside Theater 5. Headaches, nosebleeds, feeling watched. Some employees outright refused to clean it alone. I still didn't believe much of it, at least not until my first experience there. One morning, I was cleaning Theater 5 like normal. I had my iPod in while picking up leftover cups and popcorn before vacuuming the rows. The theater itself was dark, except for the dim aisle lights. After a while, I started getting this strange feeling that somebody was standing behind me. At first, I ignored it. Then it kept happening. Every few seconds, I'd suddenly feel certain someone was directly behind my back. I turned around repeatedly. Nothing. Eventually, I even pulled my headphones out and called out, "Hello?" No answer. The room stayed completely silent. I felt stupid afterward and tried focusing on work again. About 20 minutes later, I was sweeping near the top rows when suddenly I heard footsteps. Fast footsteps. Running. I looked down toward the front of the theater just in time to see a small, blonde-haired boy dart around the corner and disappear into the hallway outside. Without thinking, I dropped my broom and chased after him immediately. At 4 in the morning, there should not have been a child inside the building. I ran down the hallway into the lobby. Nobody. The entire area was empty. Confused, I kept walking until I saw my manager, Jeff, outside the front entrance smoking a cigarette. I asked him if he had seen a kid run through. At first, he looked confused. Then he laughed. I still remember how casually he said it. "Oh, so you met Charlie?" Apparently, Charlie was another regular problem at the theater. Customers often complained about a little blonde boy running through Theater 5 during movies, making noise before vanishing. Employees blamed him for knocked-over trash cans, missing supplies, and random messes appearing overnight. The female staff nicknamed him Charlie because they thought he looked like Charlie from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. To most workers, Charlie was more annoying than scary. People joked about him constantly. Some even joked he was somehow connected to the tall man. At the time, I laughed it off too. But deep down, seeing that kid had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Then came the night I encountered the tall man myself. And that completely changed everything. Usually, if you were the first employee to arrive in the morning, one of your jobs was turning on the theater lights from the projector level upstairs. The projector floor itself was creepy enough even without ghost stories. It was dark, narrow, and filled with giant cardboard movie cutouts and huge posters standing in corners. At 4 a.m, those silhouettes looked unsettling even on a good day. Normally we carried a flashlight up there. But that morning, the flashlight had disappeared. Later we'd find it tossed in a garbage can. Everybody blamed Charlie jokingly. So instead, I walked through the projector corridor in darkness, flipping switches as I went. The only light came from glowing exit signs and projector monitors. I remember one detail very clearly. I had stayed awake the entire previous night watching reruns of the Andy Griffith Show. The theme song had gotten stuck in my head, and as I walked through the corridor, I started quietly whistling it to myself. Then suddenly I felt it again. That same feeling of being watched. I stopped walking. Somewhere farther down the corridor near the projector windows, overlooking the IMAX theater, I could sense something standing there. At first, I assumed it was another cardboard cutout. There were dozens scattered around. But then it moved. I froze immediately. What I thought was a cardboard figure slowly straightened upward from a crouched position. And as it rose, I realized it was impossibly tall. At least 7 feet. A man-shaped silhouette standing in darkness. And then I heard something that honestly terrified me more than the figure itself. It was whistling. Slowly. Quietly. The exact same Andy Griffith theme song I had been whistling moments earlier, like it had been copying me. I couldn't move. My entire body locked up. The tall man started walking toward me slowly while continuing to whistle. Even in the darkness, I could tell something about his movement looked wrong. He limped slightly, dragging one leg awkwardly as he approached. Step by step, slow, deliberate. I remember trying desperately to force myself to run, but fear completely froze me in place. Then suddenly, something distracted him. He turned his head slightly, stopped whistling, and slowly walked into one of the offices farther down the corridor. The second he disappeared from view, I snapped out of it. I ran. I don't even remember getting downstairs properly. I just know I bolted outside the building and refused to go back in until the rest of the morning crew arrived. When I finally told everyone what happened, nobody seemed surprised. That honestly scared me even more. They all acted like encounters with the tall man were just part of working there. Some employees even told me not to worry because he never hurts anybody. I didn't care. Seeing him once was enough. A few weeks later, I handed in my 2 weeks' notice. To this day, I still don't know exactly what I saw in that theater. Maybe stress, maybe exhaustion from working overnight shifts, maybe the power of suggestion after hearing all the stories. But I know one thing for certain. I never stayed alone in Theater 5 again after that night. And even now, years later, hearing someone whistle that Andy Griffith theme song unexpectedly still gives me chills. A few years ago, I went through one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences of my life. Even now, when I tell the story, it almost feels disconnected from reality, like something I watched happen to somebody else, instead of something that actually happened to me. At the time, I lived in a second-floor apartment with my roommate. The complex itself wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly luxurious either. Mostly working people, families, college students, that kind of environment. Nothing about it ever felt especially dangerous before all of this started. One summer, the apartment management hired an out-of-town crew to repaint the outside of the buildings. From the very beginning, the workers made me uncomfortable. They weren't openly threatening or aggressive, but they were rough around the edges and constantly stared whenever I walked by. Sometimes they'd make comments or catcall mildly when I left for work or came home. Nothing extreme enough to report, but enough to make me uneasy every time I had to walk past them. Eventually, the apartment office left notices on everyone's doors explaining that the crews would be pressure washing and painting the balconies over the next several days. Residents were instructed to move everything from their balconies inside while the work was being done. At the time, I had a cat. Since I lived on the second floor, I usually left the sliding balcony door cracked open a little during the day so my cat could go in and out. His litter box was kept outside on the balcony to help with smell inside the apartment. And completely forgetting workers would literally be standing on the balcony that day, I accidentally left the slider partially open before leaving for work. I came home before my roommate that evening. The second I walked through the front door, something immediately felt wrong. Right there, sitting on top of the fish tank near the entrance, was a very personal item taken from my underwear drawer, just placed there openly like some kind of display. The fish tank sat directly near the entrance, so it was one of the first things you saw when entering the apartment. I froze instantly. At first, my brain tried forcing a normal explanation. My immediate assumption was that my roommate had pulled some incredibly weird prank on me. But the more I looked at it, the less sense that made. I checked the apartment carefully. Nothing else seemed disturbed. Cash was still sitting untouched in the same drawer. A small amount of weed stored nearby was also untouched. Nothing valuable appeared stolen. That's what made the whole thing so confusing. Because who breaks into somebody's apartment, goes through their underwear drawer, ignores money and valuables, and then carefully places a personal item on display in the middle of the apartment? It didn't make sense. Eventually, I convinced myself maybe there really was some harmless explanation I wasn't understanding yet. So I put the item away and tried to move on. Then the next day happened. When I got home from work that evening, there was a small wooden end table sitting directly outside my apartment door. It looked old, like something from a thrift store. And on top of it was what looked like some kind of bizarre shrine. There was a fertility statue, burning incense, half-melted candles, crystals and stones, a small plant. The incense was still smoking when I found it. At that point, real panic finally started setting in. I immediately started knocking on neighbors' doors, asking if they saw anyone place the table there. Nobody saw anything. Nobody knew anything. Then I started calling friends and acquaintances, trying to figure out if someone was playing some elaborate joke on me. I even warned people I was contacting the police and having fingerprints taken because I genuinely thought once I escalated things, somebody would finally admit it was a prank. Instead, Every single person reacted the same way. Fear. Most told me to call the police immediately. By then, I was too scared to even stay in the apartment alone, so I sat in my car waiting for my roommate to get home from work. Thankfully, my roommate was extremely protective and calm under pressure. He was from Texas, always carried a gun, and honestly treated me more like a younger sister than just a roommate. Once he arrived, we went inside together to wait for police. The police said they'd take around an hour to arrive. As we walked through the apartment checking things, I noticed more strange details. 2 small picture frames sitting along the windowsill had been opened. The photos inside were missing. One picture had been of me and my son. The other was me with my best friend. Then I walked into my bedroom, and there on the bed was the same personal item from the previous day, placed neatly on top of the blankets. At that point, if this were a horror movie, everyone watching would probably scream at me to leave immediately and never come back. But strangely, when you're actually inside a situation like that, your brain keeps trying to rationalize everything. You're surrounded by your own furniture, your own belongings, your own familiar environment. So part of you keeps believing there must still be some explanation that makes sense. You don't immediately process how serious things might actually be. When the police finally arrived, they took fingerprints and photographs. And I'll never forget the look on one officer's face when he saw the shrine outside the door. He immediately told me I needed to take the situation seriously. Very seriously. One officer flat out suggested I consider moving immediately. That's when the situation finally became real to me. Over the next couple days, I made plans to leave the apartment as quickly as possible. Nothing major happened during those days, but there were still disturbing details. At some point after police left, the shrine outside disappeared. Then the next day, while we were both at work, it reappeared again. This time my roommate removed it before I even got home because he knew how terrified I already was. Then came moving day. And honestly, that's the part that still disturbs me most, even now. While taking apart my bed, I lifted the mattress off the box spring. Hidden between them was an old film camera, not digital, an actual old-school film camera, one that absolutely did not belong to me or anyone I knew. Alongside it were more dismantled picture frames with photographs removed from them. One photo collage included pictures of me and my friend together, and specifically, only the more revealing or attractive photos had been removed from the collage. At that moment, the entire situation became terrifyingly real. Because now it was obvious someone hadn't just entered my apartment once. They had spent time there, repeatedly, close enough to my bed to hide objects inside it. I called police again immediately. They photographed everything and took the camera as evidence. I specifically asked them not to contact me about whatever might be on the film unless absolutely necessary. I genuinely didn't want to know. And thankfully, I never heard anything back afterward. To this day, I still have no idea whether the camera contained pictures of me, the apartment, or something even worse. The police strongly suspected somebody from the painting crew. The timing lined up perfectly. The incident started immediately after workers gained access to the balcony. And since the slider door had been left open, somebody could have entered the apartment without forcing entry. But as far as I know, nothing was ever proven. No arrests, no answers. I moved out within 2 days and never looked back. What still unsettles me most is how calculated everything felt. Nothing violent happened. Nothing was stolen. Instead, whoever it was seemed focused entirely on making me aware they had been inside my home. Like they wanted me frightened rather than robbed. And honestly, That psychological aspect scared me more than if they had simply stolen something valuable. Years later, the whole experience still feels unreal when I talk about it. Almost cinematic, like something from a thriller movie instead of real life. But every now and then, I'll remember details suddenly and feel that same uneasy feeling all over again. Especially when I think about that camera hidden inside my bed. And the fact that I'll probably never know what was actually on the film. When I was 14 years old, something happened that I still think about to this day, even though I've never really told anyone the full story before. Honestly, even now, part of me still tries to explain it logically. Another part of me can't. That's probably why it stayed with me for so long. At the time, my older brother had just moved out of my mom's house to start college. Before that, we had shared the upper floor of the house together. Once he left, though, I suddenly had the entire top floor to myself. At first, I thought it was awesome. More privacy, more quiet, no sharing space anymore. But after about a month of living upstairs alone, strange things started happening. The first thing I noticed was the sounds. Almost every day, at random times, I'd hear footsteps somewhere outside my bedroom. The upstairs hallway connected the bedrooms and bathroom, so at first I assumed it was just my mom or stepdad coming upstairs briefly. Except the footsteps never made sense. Sometimes they sounded like someone slowly walking away from my room. Other times, I'd hear one of the bathroom or hallway doors move suddenly on its hinges, the way doors shift slightly when another door closes somewhere else in the house and changes the air pressure. The weird thing was how consistent it became. Every day, always upstairs, always around my room. At first, I tried ignoring it. Old houses make noise, floors creak, pipes shift. That's what I kept telling myself. But some nights, the sounds became impossible to dismiss. I'd hear footsteps moving directly through the hallway outside my bedroom door, late at night, while everyone else downstairs was asleep. And not soft creaks either. Actual footsteps. Slow and deliberate. At one point, I became almost obsessed with trying to catch whoever or whatever was causing them. Some nights I'd sit awake waiting for the sounds. Other nights, I'd open my bedroom door and stand silently in the dark hallway listening. But every single time I investigated, there was nothing there. Eventually, I'd convince myself I was overreacting and go back to pretending it was just the house settling. Then November came, and that's when everything changed. One night, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. My bedroom door was shut. My computer desk sat beside the door. My computer tower had a little blue power light on it that stayed visible in the dark. I remember rolling onto my side facing the door before drifting off. At some point during the night, I half woke up in that strange, foggy state between sleeping and fully conscious. And something immediately caught my attention. The blue light from my computer was flickering. At first, I thought maybe I was just blinking slowly because I was tired. But then I realized the light wasn't malfunctioning. Something was blocking it, like a shadow moving slightly in front of it. Still half asleep, I focused my eyes, and that's when I saw him. A man-shaped figure standing between my bed and the bedroom door. At first, my brain instantly assumed it was an intruder. Somebody had broken into the house. He was standing near my computer desk, facing away from me slightly, almost like he was looking at the desk. The moment I fully realized someone was standing inside my room, every bit of sleep instantly disappeared. I became completely awake. My heart started pounding immediately. I remember trying to stay completely still while figuring out what to do. My bedroom door was slightly open behind him, and I remember thinking maybe I could quietly roll out of bed and sprint downstairs before he noticed. That was my entire plan. Just run. And before I go further, I know how unbelievable this sounds. I've replayed this moment in my head for years, trying to explain it rationally. But this is exactly how I remember it happening. The second I shifted my body slightly to move out of bed, the figure turned toward me instantly. And when it faced me directly, I realized something horrifying. It didn't have a face, not like a person standing in darkness where features are hard to see. It looked completely empty, like a human-shaped shadow, a void from head to toe. No eyes, no mouth, no skin, just darkness shaped vaguely like a person. The second it looked at me, pure panic hit me harder than anything I've ever felt before or since. I tried sitting up quickly, but before I could even react fully, the figure was suddenly standing beside my bed. I don't remember seeing it walk toward me. It just was there, right next to me. I immediately rolled backward across the bed trying to get away, and then something happened that terrified me even more. My body suddenly felt heavy, not sleepy. Heavy, like all my strength disappeared at once. The closest thing I can compare it to is being drugged or anesthetized instantly. I tried screaming for my mom and stepdad downstairs. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. But every time I tried speaking, only weak, squeaking sounds came out. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't force my voice to work properly. And through all of this, I could still see the figure standing there beside my bed, watching me. Then it slowly reached one hand toward my face. I remember the hand looking wrong, too. Not solid, just dark like the rest of it. It placed its hand over my eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. Completely gone. Instantly. At the same moment, the paralysis feeling disappeared too. Suddenly, I could move again, speak again. Everything felt normal physically. I jumped out of bed immediately and turned lights on, searching the room in panic. Nobody was there. No sounds. No movement. Nothing. But one detail still bothers me to this day. The bedroom door was open. I clearly remembered shutting it before falling asleep. Not just assuming it was shut. Actually remembering seeing it closed. Yet after whatever happened, it stood partly open again. That single detail is what stayed with me more than anything else. Because over the years, I've come up with possible explanations for almost every part of the experience. Sleep paralysis, night terrors, hypnopompic hallucinations. I know those things are real, and honestly, they explain a lot. The shadow figure, the paralysis, the inability to scream, even the sense of panic. All of those things line up frighteningly well with sleep paralysis experiences. But the open door still bothers me. Maybe I forgot closing it. Maybe my memory blended reality with the dreamlike state I was in. That's entirely possible too. But emotionally, that detail always felt different somehow. After that night, I became deeply uncomfortable with darkness for a long time. Even now as an adult, I still dislike sleeping in completely dark rooms. And sometimes, late at night, if I hear footsteps somewhere in a quiet house, I immediately think back to being 14 years old, lying in that upstairs bedroom, staring at a faceless silhouette standing in the dark beside my door. I grew up in a very old house that was originally built in 1809. Even before I was old enough to really understand what haunted meant. There was something about that house that never felt right to me. It was beautiful from the outside, the kind of historic home people admired because of its age and character. But inside it carried this constant, heavy feeling that I could never fully explain. My parents bought the house after the previous owner, an elderly woman in her late 80s, passed away. To everyone else, it probably just looked like an old home with history behind it. But almost immediately after moving in, certain parts of the house started making me uneasy, especially my bedroom and the basement. I don't remember exactly when the strange experiences started because I was pretty young at the time. But I do remember always feeling uncomfortable in my room. The closet especially terrified me. No matter what season it was, that closet stayed freezing cold, not slightly cool, freezing. Sometimes I'd open the door and feel a wave of cold air hit me immediately. And along with the cold came this strong perfume smell. The only way I could ever describe it was old lady perfume, or grandma perfume. Sweet, powdery, overwhelming, and completely out of place. The closet door also had a habit of opening and closing on its own. At first, my parents blamed old hinges or uneven floors because the house was ancient. But over time, it became harder to ignore how often strange things happened around that room specifically. At night, I constantly felt like someone was watching me while I slept. Sometimes, I'd wake up convinced somebody had just been standing beside my bed moments earlier. Other times, I'd physically feel pressure on the mattress, like someone sitting down near my feet. As a kid, I tried explaining these things to my parents, but most of the time they brushed it off as imagination or fear from living in an old house. Then the smells started spreading through other parts of the house too. My parents often left my brother and me home alone because we were old enough to take care of ourselves. And whenever I was alone, I'd notice the perfume smell drifting through certain areas unexpectedly. One spot I remember clearly was the staircase window overlooking the neighborhood. The smell would suddenly appear there strongly for no reason. Then it would move. That's the strangest part. It honestly felt like the smell traveled from room to room, like somebody invisible was walking through the house wearing heavy perfume. And every single time the smell appeared, cold followed it. The temperature around you would suddenly drop. Not throughout the entire house, just in certain spots, like pockets of freezing air moving through the rooms. Objects also started disappearing and reappearing in strange places. Things you knew you left somewhere specific would suddenly turn up somewhere impossible. At first, everybody blamed each other, but eventually it happened so often nobody could really explain it anymore. Still, none of that scared me as much as the basement. The basement felt wrong from the moment you stepped near it. Older houses have a very different kind of basement than modern homes. Ours had dirt flooring in some areas, rough cement walls, exposed beams, and old wooden stairs that were open underneath so you could see the darkness below them while walking down. I hated those stairs. Even during daytime, going into that basement filled me with dread. Nothing dramatic even happened there at first. It was just a constant, overwhelming feeling that something terrible was waiting down there. Every time I had to go into the basement, I either ran as fast as possible or begged somebody to come with me. Then when I was around 14, my parents decided to renovate the basement. And somehow, things got worse afterward. Around the same time, I was still struggling with my bedroom upstairs because of the freezing temperatures, strange smells, and constant feeling of being watched. So my parents eventually suggested I move my room downstairs into the renovated basement space instead. At first, I thought it might actually help. New room, fresh start, different environment. But after moving downstairs, the strange experiences followed me almost immediately. At first, it was subtle. I constantly felt like a man was watching me, not necessarily standing directly in front of me, but always nearby somehow. I'd catch movement from the corner of my eye and turn quickly, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was never anybody there. Just shadows, dark corners, empty rooms. Then the pounding started. Late at night, I'd hear banging sounds coming from inside the walls. Not pipes, not settling noises, actual pounding. It usually started quietly at first. Slow knocks, then gradually it would build louder and faster until it sounded like somebody trapped inside the walls hammering to get out. Those nights terrified me completely. And the longer I lived downstairs, the worse my mental state became. I became deeply depressed. I barely left the basement most days. Looking back now, I honestly don't know how much of that depression came from being isolated downstairs and how much came from constantly feeling afraid inside that house. One night, something happened that still gives me chills even now. I was home alone. Late at night, I went upstairs to get a glass of water from the kitchen. Near the back entrance of the house was a small enclosed porch with a glass door leading outside. It was winter at the time, so the porch was freezing cold, and condensation covered the inside of the glass. I remember walking past the porch toward the kitchen when suddenly I noticed movement on the glass door. 2 handprints appeared on the condensation, right in front of me, as if someone invisible had pressed their hands against the glass from the other side. Then a foggy breath mark appeared between them, like someone breathing directly onto the window. And seconds later, both the handprints and the breath slowly faded away. I froze completely, froze. At the time, I had already started privately referring to whatever I felt in the house as the dark man, because whenever I sensed something nearby, it always felt masculine, heavy, angry, watching. Standing there staring at those handprints, I became completely paralyzed with fear. I remember literally being unable to move for several minutes. I just stood there staring at the glass while my entire body shook. Then suddenly instinct took over. I ran outside and sat on the front porch for the rest of the night until my brother returned home the next morning. I couldn't force myself back inside. Even now, years later, thinking about that moment still gives me chill. I was around 15 years old then, and honestly, from that point forward, I became desperate to leave that house permanently. About 7 months later, I moved out early to attend college at 16 years old, and I never willingly lived in that house again. Only after I moved out did my parents finally start admitting strange things had happened there. Eventually, my mother divorced my father, and the house was sold. Sometime afterward, they told me details they had apparently hidden from me for years. The elderly woman who owned the house before us had died in what used to be my upstairs bedroom, and her husband had apparently suffered some kind of serious accident in the basement years earlier. Nobody would tell me exactly what happened, only that he was not considered a kind man. What disturbed me most was hearing my parents finally admit they started believing the house might actually be haunted after I left, because the activity apparently became worse afterward. They described objects being thrown, pictures falling off walls, cold spots moving through rooms, and that same sickly sweet perfume smell following people through the house. I've also heard rumors from neighbors that later owners experienced similar things too. But I've never confirmed any of it personally, because I have never stepped foot inside that house again since leaving, and honestly, I never plan to. I never plan. What's strangest about all of it now is that nobody in my family really talks about it anymore. Whenever the subject comes up, people change topics quickly or act like it never happened. Almost like the house became this silent, shared memory, everyone would rather bury completely. But sometimes late at night, I still think about those freezing cold rooms, the perfume drifting through empty hallways, the pounding inside the basement walls, and the feeling of someone standing silently behind me in the dark, watching every movement I made. And even now, part of me still wonders whether whatever lived in that house ever truly left at all. One of the most terrifying nights of my life started because of something incredibly stupid. Looking back now, it almost feels unreal. Like one of those over-the-top movie scenes where everything keeps escalating worse and worse until you genuinely think somebody is going to die. At the time, though, none of it felt exciting or funny. It felt very real. And honestly, I'm still convinced things could have ended horribly if even one small decision had gone differently. To understand the situation properly, you need to understand the area where I grew up. It wasn't exactly a war zone, but it wasn't safe either. The region was a weird mix of small suburban towns surrounded by rough inner-city neighborhoods where gang violence was common. Crime was bad enough during my high school years that the National Guard actually had to support local law enforcement at one point. Shootings weren't shocking news. They were normal news. The problem was that all the fun places teenagers wanted to go, movie theaters, bowling alleys, arcades, restaurants, were usually built near sketchy areas because land was cheaper there. So even if you were just trying to have a normal night with friends, sometimes you ended up around people you absolutely did not want problems with. This happened around the time the Rocky reboot movie had just come out. Me and two of my friends decided to go see it late one night. There was me, my best friend John, and our other friend Jack. John was one of those naturally intimidating quiet guys. Big football player, captain of the team, linebacker, barely talked unless necessary. The kind of person who stayed calm during situations where everybody else panicked. Then there was Jack. Jack was the complete opposite. Jack loved causing chaos. Not genuinely malicious chaos, just stupid, reckless, this sounds funny chaos. He constantly messed with people, pushed limits, and laughed at things that absolutely shouldn't be laughed at. At the time, he was basically the human version of, "This is probably a bad idea." Years later, he became a semi-professional baseball pitcher, which honestly makes perfect sense considering what happened next. After the movie ended, we walked back toward the parking lot. That's when we noticed a car parked near mine that had been completely destroyed. And I mean destroyed. Windows smashed, doors dented, trash dumped all over it. Dirt literally shoveled into the driver's seat. Tires slashed. Somebody had clearly targeted this car specifically and absolutely unloaded their anger on it. There was even a giant 7-Eleven Big Gulp cup standing upright on the roof, almost like some weird finishing touch. We stopped staring at it because honestly, the whole thing looked insane. Then Jack picked up a rock. Immediately, I knew this was going somewhere stupid. He held the rock up and looked at the cup sitting on the roof. "Think I can knock that cup off from here?" We were probably 90 feet away. Honestly, if he hit it, it would have been impressive. But me and John instantly told him no. Absolutely not. Let's just leave. John and I started walking toward my car while Jack lagged behind. We got inside and were literally about to leave when suddenly Jack came sprinting toward the car looking panicked. We need to go. Now. Turns out, while we told him not to throw the rock, he threw the rock. I still don't know whether he actually hit the cup or not. But apparently, he picked the worst possible moment imaginable because right after he threw it, shouting erupted near the theater entrance. and suddenly we realized something horrifying. The owner of the destroyed car had just come outside. And from their perspective, 3 random teenage guys were standing near their already vandalized vehicle, while one of them threw a rock at it. We looked guilty as hell. Then the yelling started getting louder. And this was not the kind of neighborhood where people calmly waited for explanations. This was very much a react first, think later kind of area. So I started the car immediately and pulled out fast. Meanwhile, Jack is laughing hysterically in the back seat, like this is somehow the funniest thing ever. He can't chase us, he says. His car is wrecked. And technically, he was right. What we failed to consider was that the guy clearly wasn't alone. About 5 minutes later, I noticed headlights flying up behind us. Then another car appeared too. One car started aggressively flashing high beams at me. At first, I thought maybe they were just random drivers. Then they started matching every turn I made. That's when the panic hit. I turned down a side road near a gas station, trying to test if they were actually following us. The car behind me immediately cut through the gas station parking lot and swung out in front of my car. Then stopped, completely blocking part of the road. Another car stopped behind us, and I saw doors opening. That moment is burned into my memory, because suddenly the situation became terrifyingly real. I genuinely thought we were about to get shot. My friends were yelling at the same time, but everything sounded distant and muffled because adrenaline completely took over my brain. John was saying something about how between the 3 of us, we could probably fight them. He and I were both athletes. Jack played baseball, but I didn't care. There were multiple guys. This neighborhood was dangerous, and we had absolutely no idea if they had weapons. Meanwhile, our car contained exactly 3 useful items: an ice scraper, a watch, and leftover milk duds. Not exactly ideal defensive equipment. Then I saw something metallic glint near the driver's hand in the car blocking us. To this day, I don't know what it actually was. But in that moment, my brain instantly screamed weapon, and pure survival instinct kicked in. I slammed the gas pedal down hard, swerved around the first car, barely squeezing past them, cut through the gas station parking lot, blew straight through a red light, and took off. That's when the chase officially started. The cars stayed right behind us. Jack stopped laughing pretty quickly after that. Now he was frantically calling friends, trying to find nearby parties or houses where we could show up with enough people around to discourage an attack. Meanwhile, John sat calmly in the passenger seat, removing his jewelry, emptying his pockets, and placing his wallet and keys into my glove compartment. I looked over at him, completely confused. And he goes, "If they catch us, I don't want them taking my stuff." Then he wrapped his chain around his fist like brass knuckles. The man was preparing for war while I was trying not to crash the car. At one point, we caught a lucky green light, while both pursuing cars got trapped behind traffic at a red. I immediately took advantage and sped down a larger road, trying to lose them. I hit nearly 95 miles per hour for several minutes. Eventually, Jack says he can't see headlights anymore. Thinking we finally lost them, I stupidly slowed down. Huge mistake, because a minute later, Jack suddenly starts panicking again. They're back. Sure enough, both cars came flying toward us fast from behind. That's when something strange happened. Instead of panicking harder, I suddenly got weirdly calm. I started driving normally. No swerving, no speeding, just acting like a regular driver. The first pursuing car pulled alongside us, slightly ahead. For one glorious moment, it genuinely seemed like they lost track of us. Then the driver looked over, realized it was us, and slowed down immediately. But that tiny moment of confusion gave me exactly enough time to yank the wheel at the last second and take an exit ramp. The first car overshot completely. Now only one car remained behind us. At this point, even Jack finally agreed maybe fighting one carload of people was better than getting cornered by two. But none of us actually wanted that outcome. Now we were back near roads we knew better than they did. Dark rural back roads, cornfields, sharp turns, no streetlights. The pursuing car struggled keeping up. Eventually, we decided on one final desperate bluff. I pulled off near a huge empty field and stopped the car. The other vehicle stopped about 100 feet away. John got out first, then Jack, then me. We started slowly walking toward their car, and suddenly Jack starts waving his arms wildly. At first, I thought he completely lost his mind. Then I realized he wasn't waving at them. He was pretending to signal hidden people in the cornfield behind us, pointing dramatically like we had an entire ambush team waiting nearby. It was honestly one of the dumbest and smartest things I've ever seen simultaneously. And somehow, it worked. The pursuing car instantly threw itself into reverse, then turned around and sped away as fast as possible. Gone. Just like that. We stood there in silence for several seconds afterward, trying to process what had just happened. Because the truth is, if they had actually gotten out of that car, none of us really knew what would have happened. Maybe it would have just been a fight. Maybe weapons were involved. Maybe somebody would have gotten seriously hurt. Or worse. Looking back now, the craziest part is how all of it started because Jack couldn't resist throwing one stupid rock at a cup sitting on top of a destroyed car. And somehow, his equally stupid fake ambush trick ended up saving us in the end. I grew up in a small town in Amish country in Ohio. And like most teenagers living in a place where absolutely nothing exciting ever happens, my friends and I spent a lot of time trying to create our own entertainment. There were only so many times you could drive around town, hang out at gas stations, or sit in somebody's basement before boredom started making terrible ideas sound amazing. And usually, the worse the idea sounded, the more likely we were to actually do it. One night during high school, a group of us decided to watch the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre together, which, in hindsight, was probably the worst possible movie choice, considering what happened afterward. By the time the movie ended, everybody was already nervous and hyped up. The atmosphere was perfect for bad decisions. That's when one of my friends mentioned an abandoned house deep in the woods that he knew about. Immediately, everybody wanted to go. Because apparently watching a movie about people getting murdered in isolated rural houses wasn't enough warning for us. There were around 10 of us all together. Mostly guys, a couple girls, all teenagers looking for adrenaline and something scary to laugh about later. To get to the house, we had to drive down this isolated gravel road in the middle of nowhere and park near the edge of a wooded area. From there, we crossed a shallow river on foot and hiked almost a mile through thick woods using flashlights. I also brought my shotgun. Not because I seriously expected trouble. Honestly, it was mostly for the same dumb reason teenage boys do anything dangerous. Because it felt cool at the time. Still, once we got deeper into those woods, I was weirdly glad I had it. The further we walked, the quieter everything became. No road sounds, no houses nearby. Nothing except our flashlights cutting through trees and everyone trying way too hard to act brave after watching a horror movie. Eventually, we reached the house. And honestly, it looked exactly like something straight out of a nightmare. It was this massive old mansion-style house that looked like it had probably been built sometime around the early 1900s. Huge windows, rotting wood, broken railings, sections collapsing inward from age. There was no driveway anymore. No signs of recent activity. Just this giant, abandoned structure sitting alone deep in the woods, like the forest had swallowed it over time. The place clearly hadn't been maintained for years. We quickly realized we couldn't safely enter through the main part of the house because the entire second floor had partially collapsed into the first. Broken beams and debris blocked most of the interior. So instead, we started walking around outside, exploring with our flashlights. That's when things started getting strange. One of my friends suddenly called everybody over to one wall near the back of the house. There was writing scratched or painted across the surface. At first, it looked like random graffiti, but then we noticed something that instantly made everyone uncomfortable. At the end of the writing were initials. 10 sets of initials. And somehow, every single set matched someone in our group. Exactly. Now, logically, there are probably explanations for that coincidence. Common initials. Teenagers freaking themselves out. But standing there in the middle of dark woods after watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it felt horrifying. Especially for the girls in the group, who were already on edge. The mood changed immediately. People stopped joking. Several started insisting we leave right then. And honestly, we probably should have. But before anyone could fully decide, one of my friends shouted from the other side of the house, "Hey, I found something!" Everybody rushed over immediately. He stood outside a broken first-floor window, staring inside with his flashlight. We looked through the window, and hanging from the ceiling inside the room was a white wedding dress tied to a rope. Even now, I remember how wrong it looked, hanging there in darkness. Across the front of the dress was a massive dark stain that looked exactly like dried blood. The entire room felt staged almost deliberately to terrify people. The second we saw it, everybody started backing away immediately. Then suddenly the ground underneath several of us shifted. And before I even understood what happened, everything collapsed beneath our feet. 6 of us fell straight through the ground. I remember hearing screaming, wood snapping, dirt crumbling, then slamming hard into the darkness below. We dropped about 10 feet underneath the house. At first, I thought we'd fallen into a basement. But once I got my flashlight working properly, I realized it wasn't a normal basement at all. The walls were dirt. The floor was dirt. I think it felt more like some kind of underground room dug beneath the structure. And the things inside that room still haunt me, honestly. My flashlight swept across tables and walls covered with old chains, ropes, rusted hooks, saws, tools, and all kinds of disturbing junk arranged carefully around the room. Not random garbage either. Placed deliberately. The whole place looked horrifyingly similar to something from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like somebody was actually using the space. Nobody even really stopped to process what we were seeing. The second one of my friends started screaming, "Get the fuck out!" Survival instinct completely took over. The guy still standing above us reached down through the hole, trying to pull everyone back up as quickly as possible. Adrenaline was pumping so hard, nobody even spoke properly anymore. Everybody scrambled desperately trying to climb out. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured except one guy who landed badly and messed up his ankle pretty badly during the fall. Once we got out, panic fully set in. Nobody wanted to stay there another second. 2 guys practically carried the injured friend, while the rest of us stayed packed tightly together, moving back through the woods. And honestly, that walk back terrified me more than anything else. Because now the possibility hit all of us simultaneously. What if someone actually lived there? What if whoever arranged that underground room came back while we were inside? I remember walking at the back of the group holding my shotgun with the safety off. constantly turning around, scanning the darkness behind us. Every snapped branch sounded dangerous. Every movement in the woods felt threatening. I have genuinely never been more prepared to shoot at something in my life than during that walk back to the cars. Eventually, we made it out safely and drove home still completely shaken. The next day, a few of us decided to go back during daylight. Partly because we wanted to make sure we hadn't exaggerated everything in panic, and partly because teenagers are idiots. Teenagers are. But when we reached the gravel road leading toward the woods, we immediately saw several police cars parked nearby. 3 of them. We pulled over and asked what happened. Apparently, somebody in the area heard us yelling the night before and contacted the police. The officers eventually investigated the house, and according to them, the place was being used as a meth lab. Worse than that, they also believed it was connected to at least one murder scene. After hearing that, my stomach honestly dropped. Because suddenly, everything inside that underground room made horrifying sense. The ropes, the chains, the tools, the weird staged wedding dress. It wasn't abandoned horror movie nonsense. Real people had actually been using that place. And to this day, I still think about how lucky we were. Because if whoever operated out of that house had actually been there when we showed up, things could have gone unbelievably bad. We were just dumb teenagers with flashlights and fake courage wandering into the middle of something genuinely dangerous. And honestly, I don't think any of us fully understood how close we may have come to real trouble until much later. During my junior year of college, I moved into this huge old house with a bunch of other students. It was one of those classic off-campus rentals that looked amazing when you first toured it because it was cheap, spacious, and close to everything. Only later did you start noticing all the weird little details that probably should have scared you from the beginning. The house itself was enormous. 4 people lived on the first floor. 5 people lived on the second floor. And there were 2 more people upstairs in the attic area that none of us really knew very well. The whole place constantly felt crowded and noisy, but in a comforting college kind of way. There was always music playing somewhere, random people hanging around the kitchen, somebody cooking food at 2 a.m, parties every other weekend, and endless chaos. At first, the house just felt old. Not haunted, not creepy, just old. The floors creaked constantly, doors stuck sometimes, and the pipes made noises in the walls at night. Typical ancient college house stuff. But then I went down into the basement for the first time. And immediately, something about it felt wrong. The basement itself wasn't finished at all. It had exposed stone walls, weak lighting, uneven floors, and that damp underground smell old basements always have. There was a washing machine and dryer down there, but neither actually worked properly, so nobody really used the space except occasionally during parties. Still, one specific part of the basement stood out immediately. Toward the very back was a single locked room. And I swear, every time I went near that room, I felt this overwhelming sense of fear for absolutely no logical reason. It wasn't even dramatic looking. Just an old door with a lock on it. But something about it made my stomach twist every time I looked at it. Eventually, I found out why everybody else avoided it too. Apparently, when some of my roommates first moved into the house, that room hadn't been locked yet. One of the girls had gone exploring down there out of curiosity. And inside the room, she found several human teeth scattered around, along with what she described as strange tools. Nobody ever explained exactly what kind of tools. And honestly, nobody really wanted details. Shortly afterward, the landlord, who had only recently purchased the property, locked the room permanently. From that point on, nobody ever saw inside again. Naturally, being college students, we all joked about serial killers, murder rooms, cult stuff, and haunted basements. But deep down, I think everybody genuinely hated being near that room. Months passed after that without anything major happening. At least, not to me personally. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I had just woken up from a nap and went into the kitchen to cook something. The house was unusually quiet that day, and as far as I knew, nobody else was home on our floor. I started making food while half awake and not really paying attention to anything around me. Then suddenly the hallway light next to the kitchen switched off. I glanced over, but didn't think much of it. Old house, bad wiring. It happens sometimes. Then a few seconds later, the light turned back on. That caught my attention immediately. The weird part was the location of the switch. The hallway light was controlled by a switch inside the stairwell behind a closed door near the kitchen, meaning somebody physically had to be standing there flipping it. So I paused and waited. A few seconds later, the light switched off again. At that point, I figured somebody had come home and was screwing with me. So I immediately walked over, opened the stairwell door quickly, expecting to catch someone there. Nobody. The stairwell was empty. I checked downstairs too. Nobody on the lower floor. Now I was officially uncomfortable, but I still tried rationalizing it. Maybe electrical problems. Maybe faulty wiring. Old houses do weird things. So I returned to cooking. And the second I turned back toward the stove, the hallway light started flicking on and off again repeatedly. Not randomly either. Almost deliberately. On, off, on, off. I remember just standing there, frozen for several seconds, staring toward the hallway, trying to process what was happening. Then I heard music. Soft music coming from the living room next to the kitchen. And honestly, my first reaction was relief. Because finally, I assumed somebody else had come home. I walked into the living room, expecting to see one of my roommates sitting there. Instead, the room was empty. Completely empty. But music was definitely playing. I followed the sound and realized it was coming from a set of speakers near the window, connected to a laptop sitting closed on the ledge. At first, I assumed maybe the laptop was playing music with the screen asleep or something. Then I noticed something that instantly made my blood run cold. The laptop wasn't even turned on, and the television nearby was displaying one of those gray static channels, exactly like something out of a horror movie. I slowly walked toward the speakers, trying desperately to make sense of it. The music kept playing, soft and distorted. To this day, I can't even remember what song it was because my brain immediately shifted into pure panic mode. I reached down and unplugged the speakers directly from the wall. The music stopped instantly. And in that exact moment, a full-body chill hit me harder than anything I've ever felt before. Not fear from watching a scary movie. Real fear. The kind where your entire nervous system suddenly screams that something is deeply wrong. I didn't investigate further. I didn't act brave. I didn't check rooms. I turned off the stove, grabbed my keys, walked calmly out of the house, trying not to panic, got into my car, and drove away immediately. I stayed gone for hours. Later that night, I came back once other roommates were home again. But I didn't tell anybody what happened right away, because honestly, part of me still hoped there was some logical explanation or prank involved. A few weeks later, though, I finally brought it up during a conversation. Mostly because I expected somebody to laugh and admit they'd messed with me somehow. Instead, The room went completely quiet. One by one, my roommates started sharing things they had experienced too. One girl admitted she regularly woke up in the middle of the night hearing noises inside her closet. Sometimes she'd hear hangers moving around like somebody had brushed against them. Another roommate said he constantly heard footsteps above his room late at night, even when nobody upstairs was home. Then another guy quietly admitted he once woke up in the middle of the night and saw a dark figure standing silently in the kitchen, staring toward his room. He said after several seconds, the figure slowly turned and walked back toward the stairwell before disappearing. Nobody really joked much after that conversation. And strangely, we never seriously investigated anything either. I think deep down, none of us actually wanted answers, because old houses already feel creepy enough sometimes. But once multiple people start independently experiencing things they can't explain, the atmosphere changes completely. You stop feeling alone in the house. And even now, years later, when I think back on that basement room with the locked door, the human teeth, the flickering lights, and the music playing from a powered-off laptop, I still honestly don't know what scares me more. The possibility something supernatural was happening there, or the possibility that something completely human once happened in that house that was somehow even worse. A few years ago, my cousin and his wife went through a really rough period in their lives. Money was tight, work was unstable, and they needed somewhere cheap to stay while they got back on their feet. Like a lot of people in bad situations, they took whatever option they could find. Her uncles owned a small house flipping business around the older suburbs near Toronto. They bought run-down properties cheap, fixed them up, and either rented or sold them for profit. Most of the places they worked on were old, neglected houses that needed serious repairs. One particular property had recently been purchased and wasn't ready to sell yet, but it had heating, electricity, and enough room for temporary living. The house itself was a complete dump, according to my cousin. Peeling paint, warped floors, old plumbing, weird smells in certain rooms. The kind of place that already feels uncomfortable before anything strange even happens. Still, it had an extra bedroom, and they desperately needed somewhere affordable. So they moved in. At the time, it was just my cousin Jay, his wife A, and their 2 cats living on the ground floor, while the uncles worked on repairs during the day. For the first few months, things were mostly normal. Not perfect, but normal. The house was creepy in the way old houses always are. Pipes made noises at night. Floorboards creaked constantly. Doors shifted slightly because the house settled unevenly. But nothing happened that couldn't be explained. Then, around 4 months later, the uncles decided to rescue 2 more cats. That's when everything started changing. At first, it was subtle. Small things. They'd hear noises late at night that didn't make sense. Soft thumps downstairs. Sounds like movement in empty rooms. Occasionally small objects would disappear, jewelry, keys, wallets, only to randomly show up later in strange places. But nobody immediately panicked. My cousin is the type of guy who constantly misplaces things. He's a heavy engine mechanic, built like a tank, practical, logical, not remotely superstitious. So when something went missing, everybody usually just blamed him for forgetting where he put it. But over time, the atmosphere inside the house started feeling increasingly wrong, especially around the basement. The basement door was located near the kitchen area, and for some reason, all 4 cats became obsessed with it. Not playful obsessed either. Terrified. The cats would gather together in front of the basement door in this strange half-circle formation and stare at it silently for long periods of time. Then they'd start hissing. low at first, then louder. Sometimes all 4 cats would suddenly begin yowling so violently in the middle of the night that it woke everyone in the house. Every time J or A rushed over to see what was happening, the cats would scatter immediately. At first, they assumed there were rats or animals in the basement walls. That seemed logical enough. So eventually, the uncles hired an exterminator to inspect the place and set traps. The exterminator spent a while down there laying poison and checking around the basement. When he came back upstairs, he casually mentioned something odd. He told them they should probably keep the cats away from the basement while the traps were active. And that's when everyone suddenly realized something strange. None of them had ever actually seen the cats enter the basement. Ever. The basement door was sometimes left open during repairs, but despite constantly gathering near it, none of the cats would cross the threshold. Not once. Even animals normally curious about everything refused to go downstairs. That realization unsettled everyone more than they wanted to admit. But life continued, until the night that finally made J and A leave the house permanently. One evening, A was downstairs in the kitchen, washing dishes, while J was upstairs helping the uncles install shelves. The house was otherwise quiet. Then suddenly, A heard heavy footsteps upstairs. Not unusual at first, but within seconds, whoever was walking broke into a full sprint. She heard someone running hard down the staircase toward the basement door. Fast. Aggressive. The footsteps thundered down the stairs so loudly, she immediately assumed it was Jay messing around. Then the basement door slammed shut with unbelievable force. The sound was so violent, it startled her badly enough that she dropped a dish into the sink and shattered it. Instantly angry, she yelled something at Jay about being an idiot and scaring her. Then roughly 20 seconds later, Jay calmly walked downstairs from the upper floor. Completely normal. He looked confused and asked if she was all right, because he and the uncles heard a loud crash downstairs. The second she saw him, she felt all the blood drain from her body, because according to him, he had never come downstairs at all. He'd been upstairs the entire time helping install shelves with the uncles, meaning whoever she heard sprinting down the stairs and slamming the basement door wasn't him. At that point, the uncles grabbed flashlights and went downstairs to check the basement. Nobody was there. Nothing was disturbed. No signs anyone had entered or exited. But according to A, the footsteps sounded absolutely real. Not vague noises, not creaking wood. Heavy boots pounding downstairs at full speed. After that night, neither J nor A could comfortably stay in the house anymore. They moved out within a week or two, and apparently the uncles didn't stay much longer either. Eventually, the property was sold off to developers, demolished, and replaced by commercial buildings. Now there's apparently a Tim Hortons, a Wendy's, and a Subway sitting where the house once stood. For years, that should have been the end of the story. Just another creepy old house experience nobody could fully explain. But then something happened later that completely changed how they viewed everything. A few years after moving out, A was telling the story to a coworker at her new job. The coworker asked where the house had been located. As soon as A described the area, the girl immediately recognized it. Apparently, she had grown up in that suburb, and according to her, that house was locally infamous. Years before my cousin ever lived there, an elderly woman had lived alone in that house with multiple cats. One day, after nobody had seen her for a long time, authorities entered the home and discovered she had died in the basement. The story around the neighborhood was that she had taken her own life. And because her body remained there undiscovered for days, the cats eventually began eating parts of her to survive. The coworker even mentioned local kids used to dare each other to sneak around the property and peek through the basement windows because the house was considered creepy for years afterward. Now maybe all of it was coincidence. Old house noises, paranoia, cats reacting to smells or animals. But according to my cousin, the moment he heard the story about the woman in the basement, every strange thing suddenly felt different, especially the cats. Because out of everything that happened in that house, the thing he still can't explain is why every single cat refused to ever step foot downstairs. When I was in 5th grade, my family moved into a house that I never truly felt comfortable in. From the very beginning, something about the place felt wrong to me, though I couldn't explain why at the time. It wasn't one dramatic moment that caused the fear either. It was the slow buildup of strange experiences over the years that eventually made me dreaded being there alone. The house itself had an unusual history before we even moved in. The previous owner didn't want to leave. Apparently his wife had inherited another property, and she wanted them to move there instead. But according to my parents, the husband fought the sale constantly. He made everything difficult during the process and seemed bitter right up until the day we moved in. Even as a kid, I remember the tension surrounding the whole situation. The upstairs of the house wasn't even properly finished when we bought it. It was basically exposed stud walls with random pieces of sheetrock hanging here and there. There were piles of insulation, wood scraps, nails, and garbage scattered all over the floor. Most people would have looked at it and walked away. But my parents loved the idea of fixing it up. They saw potential. The previous owner, however, seemed determined to leave the place in the worst condition possible before moving out. My parents specifically asked him to clean up the debris upstairs before we arrived. Instead, my older brother showed up one day and caught the man literally ripping down what little sheetrock remained upstairs and burning it in the backyard. As if that wasn't disturbing enough. After we moved in, we discovered he had apparently shoved human feces into the air vents throughout parts of the house. That alone should have probably been enough warning. But my parents stayed. And at first, the weirdness seemed small. Mostly noises. The house was constantly loud in ways old houses normally are, except these sounds always seemed different somehow. One of the first strange things happened shortly after we moved in. My mom repeatedly complained about hearing crashes late at night. Not normal bumps or creaks. It sounded exactly like dishes or heavy objects falling off shelves and smashing onto the floor. Every single time, she would run into the room expecting to find broken glass everywhere. And every single time, nothing had moved. I know she wasn't imagining it because one night I heard it too. The sound was unbelievably real, like an entire shelf collapsing. We rushed into the room together and everything sat perfectly untouched. Now my mother is not the type of person who invents stories or exaggerates things. That's partly why those moments stuck with me so strongly. Over time, things escalated slowly. I began waking up almost every night around 2 or 3 in the morning to the sound of footsteps moving through the house. At first, I convinced myself it was probably normal house noises. But the footsteps always sounded deliberate, heavy, measured, like somebody walking slowly from room to room. My bedroom sat in a terrible location for a nervous kid. It was positioned near the front entrance and close to the living room. So every sound echoed directly through my walls. Every night I'd lie frozen in bed, convinced there was a burglar inside the house. I became terrified of moving, terrified of breathing too loudly. I'd hide under blankets listening to footsteps moving somewhere beyond my door. Eventually, when the upstairs renovation was finally completed, the sleeping arrangements changed. I moved into my brother's old room. He moved into my parents' old room. And my parents moved upstairs. At first, I thought changing rooms might help. Instead, things got worse. My new bedroom sat directly beneath the living room. The same room connected to the unfinished upstairs area where all the strange things had originally happened. That's when the footsteps became almost constant. I kept trying to rationalize them. I told myself it was our dog wandering around at night, but one evening, I secretly let the dog sleep in my room with me specifically to test that theory. I woke up again around 3 in the morning to footsteps moving through the house. The dog was asleep beside me. That realization terrified me more than the footsteps themselves. For a while after that, things quieted down. Or maybe I just became emotionally exhausted from being constantly afraid. Then came the night I still remember more vividly than anything else. I was almost in 8th grade at that point. The next morning, my family was supposed to leave for a trip I'd been excited about for months. That night, I woke up suddenly around 4 in the morning. At first, I heard a soft hissing sound near my aquarium. You know how fish tanks sometimes make bubbling noises when the water level drops? That's what I convinced myself it was. I rolled over trying to ignore it, but the sound kept growing louder. Then I realized it wasn't hissing anymore. It sounded like whispering. At first, I froze. My immediate thought was burglars again, but this time something felt different. It felt more real somehow. I remember lying there, trying to convince myself to be brave, because I was older now. I actually thought about all the hand-to-hand combat scenes I'd seen in Star Trek, and convinced myself I could somehow defend the house if I needed to. Which is honestly ridiculous looking back now. But fear makes you think strangely. So finally, I got out of bed. I slowly opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The whispering immediately became clearer. I moved carefully toward the living room. The entire house felt ice cold and silent except for those voices. By the time I reached the living room, I could distinguish actual words, not full sentences, but fragments. It. Soft, overlapping whispers, like two people having a conversation around the corner. The voices were coming from near the staircase leading upstairs. The staircase had once had a door attached to it before my parents converted it into an archway, so the sound echoed strangely there. Our dog was lying on his bed nearby, and what terrified me most was that he reacted to my presence, not the voices. When I walked in, he lifted his head calmly and came over to me like nothing unusual was happening. I sat on the couch trying not to panic while the whispers continued. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The dog rested his head on my lap, and I grabbed onto him desperately. I sat there for several minutes, listening to those voices continue around the corner. Eventually, I forced myself to move. Slowly, I stood up and walked toward the staircase. Every instinct in my body screamed not to look. But I did anyway. I stepped around the archway expecting to find intruders standing there. Instead, the staircase was completely dark, completely empty. And the second I looked into it, the whispering stopped instantly. Total silence. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. I didn't go back to bed that night. I sat at the top of the stairs until morning because I was too terrified to move, but too embarrassed to wake my parents. And honestly, that wasn't even the only disturbing thing that happened there. That entire area always felt wrong somehow. Our neighbor's horse died horribly in the nearby field, and afterward the owner completely lost his mind emotionally. The neighboring house supposedly had a reputation for destroying marriages. There was also an abandoned farmhouse near my bedroom window, where tenants never stayed longer than a few months before leaving. Eventually, the place sat empty altogether. A couple times when I snuck out at night as a teenager, I cut through the backyard near that abandoned farmhouse. Afterward, I'd return home with strange finger-shaped bruises on my arms and legs. Once, while waiting for the school bus alone in the dark winter morning, I distinctly heard a low, growling voice tell me to go. My mother later claimed she saw a shadowy figure walk down the hallway and descend the stairs late one night, too. But out of everything that happened in that house, the whispering still scares me the most. Because that was the moment everything stopped feeling like imagination. It felt real. Too real. And even now, years later, my parents still live there. Every time I visit, I still wake up during the night, listening carefully to the sounds coming from downstairs. When I was around 13 years old, my best friend lived directly across the street from me. Back then, life was simple. We spent almost every single day together playing video games, watching movies, eating junk food, and staying awake way too late for kids our age. His parents were really close friends with my dad, so I practically treated their house like my second home. Sometimes I'd walk over there during the day, sometimes late at night, and sometimes I'd just sleep over without even planning to. The neighborhood itself was pretty quiet. Across from our houses there was a large empty dirt lot covered in weeds and patches of dry grass. During the daytime, it looked harmless. Just another abandoned piece of land nobody cared about. But at night, it always felt different. The area was dark, and the streetlights barely reached the field. Looking back now, I think that place always made me uncomfortable, even before anything strange happened there. One night, sometime around 2 a.m, I decided to head over to my friend's house. I remember stepping outside and feeling how unusually cold the air was. It wasn't winter or anything. But the moment I walked out my front door, chills ran through my body. My arms broke out in goosebumps instantly. At first, I ignored it. I figured maybe I was just tired or paranoid because it was so late. I started walking across the yard toward the street like I had done hundreds of times before. After maybe 20 steps, something made me glance toward the empty lot beside my house. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the darkness. But then I saw it clearly. There was a figure standing near my neighbor's fence, completely still. It looked like the outline of a person, but darker somehow, almost like a shadow standing upright in the middle of the field. I froze for a second, staring at it. My stomach dropped instantly. Even from that distance, something about it felt wrong. I tried to act like I hadn't seen it. I remember telling myself not to panic, not to look scared, just keep walking. But after another few steps, I looked again. And this time the figure had changed. The dark silhouette was glowing bright white, not like someone shining a flashlight. It was glowing from inside itself somehow, lighting up the area around it. I know how insane that sounds. But that's exactly what I saw. And then something even stranger happened. Instead of running away, I felt pulled toward it. It's hard to explain properly. It was almost like my thoughts stopped feeling like my own for a few seconds. Without even realizing it, I changed direction and started walking toward the thing standing in the field. Every step closer made my body feel heavier, like I was moving through water. I remember feeling terrified, but at the same time, unable to stop approaching it. Then suddenly, I heard it laugh. It was deep. Not human deep either. It sounded wrong, like several voices layered together into one horrible sound. The second I heard that laugh, the glowing figure started changing shape. I swear on my life, I saw what looked like horns forming on its head. That snapped me out of whatever trance I was in. Pure panic hit me all at once. I turned and sprinted toward my friend's house as fast as I could. My chest felt tight, and I was already close to tears from fear alone. After only a couple seconds of running, I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy footsteps. Fast. It sounded like something was chasing me across the dirt. I looked back quickly, but saw nothing there. Then I turned forward again and nearly collapsed from fear. The figure was now standing directly in front of my friend's house, staring through the front window. That same horrible laugh echoed again. At that point, my brain completely stopped working logically. I didn't know what to do. I just knew I needed to get inside somehow. My friend's parents used to leave a garage door opener hidden under the seat of their car for emergencies. I ran straight toward the car, yanked the door open, grabbed the opener, and hit the button. As the garage door slowly started lifting, I heard panting behind me. Then footsteps again. Closer this time, much closer. I dove toward the opening garage door, trying to slide underneath before it fully opened. Right as I got halfway under, I felt something grab me. Or at least, it felt like it did. I can still remember the sensation on my ankle. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life, because in that moment, I honestly thought I was going to die. Then suddenly, where everything flashed bright white. For just a second, the entire lot lit up, and standing near the edge of the empty field was another figure. But this one looked different. It wasn't dark. It looked bright, almost human-shaped, but glowing softly. The second I saw it, every ounce of fear disappeared. I can't explain why. I just suddenly felt calm, completely calm. I scrambled inside, slammed the garage door shut, and ran upstairs to my friend's room. I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. When I finally told him what happened, I expected him to laugh at me or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, his face went pale. He told me he had been seeing strange figures around both our houses for months, sometimes outside his windows, sometimes standing in the empty lot, sometimes just watching. He said whenever he saw them, he'd freeze completely and shut his eyes until they disappeared. The way he described them matched exactly what I had seen outside. That should have made me feel less crazy. Instead, it terrified me even more. We stayed awake the rest of the night playing video games and trying not to think about it. But around 4:30 in the morning, while a movie played quietly in the background, we suddenly heard scratching behind us. Slow scratching against glass. We both turned at the same time. And there it was again, standing outside the window. Just a dark silhouette staring directly at us. I immediately recognized it as the same thing from outside earlier. My friend whispered, "Don't move." The way he said it made my blood run cold. So we sat completely still while the figure stood outside, watching us. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us breathed properly. It felt like forever, but it was probably only about a minute. Then suddenly it slammed against the glass. Both of us completely lost it. We screamed and ran out of the room into the living room downstairs. My friend started crying, convinced the thing was after him specifically. Honestly, I was crying too at that point. We hid under blankets on the couch like little kids because we genuinely didn't know what else to do. Then somehow it got worse. Standing in the hallway leading toward the living room was the silhouette again, closer than before, watching us. We started screaming for his parents at the top of our lungs. Finally, his dad came out looking exhausted and annoyed, asking why we were making so much noise at nearly 5 in the morning. We tried explaining everything, but of course he blamed it on our imaginations. Still, even after he calmed us down, neither of us slept the rest of the night. Over the next month, strange things kept happening. My friend would call me in the middle of the night, saying he saw dark figures walking around my house. One night, around 2 in the morning, he called sounding completely panicked, saying there were black silhouettes outside my windows. I woke my dad up immediately and told him someone was outside. He checked and saw nothing. But when I went back to my room, I saw 2 silhouettes standing just beyond my window, perfectly still, watching. I couldn't sleep in my room that night. While I was still on the phone with my friend, I suddenly heard him screaming on the other end. Not joking around screaming, real terror. He shouted that he thought something was inside his house. Then I heard loud banging noises through the phone. His screams got worse and worse until finally his parents came into his room. A week later, they moved out. Completely. No explanation, no discussion. They just left. What makes this story even stranger is what happened afterward. About a month and a half later, my family actually moved into that same house because it was larger and selling for a good price. Years later, my dad eventually gave the house to me. So now I still live there. The same house, the same street, the same empty lot outside my window. For years, my friend refused to fully talk about what happened back then. Every time I brought it up, he'd change the subject. But a couple months ago, I finally told him something. I admitted that every now and then, even now, I still see silhouettes outside the house at night. After I told him that, he finally opened up completely. He confessed that during the time they lived there, his parents had also been seeing things. They just never wanted to scare him by admitting it. He said there were nights where he felt invisible hands pulling at his legs while he tried to sleep, like something was trying to drag him downward. He said sometimes it felt like someone was standing directly behind him, breathing on his neck. And the second his parents entered the room, everything would stop instantly. To this day, I still don't know what we saw. I've searched online for years trying to find explanations, stories, anything similar. Nothing ever fully matches. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe fear mixed with being young and paranoid. Or maybe there really was something in that field watching us all those nights. All I know is this. Even now, years later, there are nights when I look out my window toward that empty lot and catch what looks like a silhouette standing perfectly still in the darkness. And every single time, I still feel the exact same fear I felt when I was 13 years old. A few years ago, my roommate and I were desperately trying to find a new place to live. Our lease at our old apartment had already expired, and we'd somehow managed to stay there an extra month while scrambling to find something affordable. Every decent place we looked at was either too expensive, too small, or already rented before we even had a chance to apply. We were stressed, exhausted, and honestly getting pretty desperate. That's when we found the house. The second we saw the listing, it almost felt too good to be true. It was huge compared to anything else we could afford. Massive rooms, high ceilings, an old garden in the back, and it was located close to both our jobs. The neighborhood itself was quiet and older. The kind of place with giant trees hanging over the streets and houses that looked like they'd been standing there forever. But the house definitely had problems. The owner had recently inherited it from a distant relative and was in the process of renovating it. Structurally, the place was fine, but cosmetically, it looked rough. Really rough. The floors were stained and warped. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips from the walls. Some of the furniture looked like it hadn't been touched in 30 years. Dust covered almost every surface. There were random old decorations left behind, boxes stacked in corners, and a strange smell throughout the entire house that no amount of open windows could fully get rid of. Still, we didn't care. The owner explained that they planned to slowly renovate everything over the next few months. But since we needed a place immediately, we convinced them to let us move in while the work was still being done. In exchange, we negotiated lower rent. At the time, it felt like we'd gotten incredibly lucky. The owner had already installed brand new appliances, fixed the plumbing, and updated most of the electrical work. It was just the appearance that hadn't caught up yet. Looking back now, that house honestly looked like the perfect setting for a horror movie. And unfortunately, it started feeling like one too. The first night there, my roommate stayed over at his girlfriend's apartment while I stayed alone in the house. I remember being excited at first. I ordered takeout, watched TV in the giant living room, and tried to ignore how creepy the place felt after dark. But the second nighttime fully settled in. Something about the house changed. It's hard to explain exactly. The atmosphere felt heavy, like the entire house was watching me. Every little noise suddenly stood out. The creaking floors, the pipes knocking inside the walls, branches scratching lightly against windows outside. I kept getting chills running down my back for no reason. I tried brushing it off. Old houses make noise. That's normal. But no matter where I sat in the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was there with me. At one point, I even walked through every room, checking closets and corners, because I became convinced someone had somehow gotten inside. Of course, nobody was there. Eventually, I forced myself to go to bed. That was when things got worse. Even though it was the middle of winter outside, I felt unbearably hot all night long. I kept waking up sweaty and uncomfortable. My skin felt itchy, almost like something was lightly touching or pinching me while I slept. And then the dream started. Over and over again, I dreamed about an old woman standing in my room. She wore a white nightgown and just stared at me silently from the corner. Every time I woke up and fell back asleep, the dream continued where it left off. Only each time she was closer. First standing by the doorway, then beside the dresser, then at the foot of the bed. Until finally, I woke up suddenly because it genuinely felt like someone had grabbed both my ankles. I sat upright instantly, heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. The room was empty, but I swear the air in that room felt ice cold. I didn't sleep again after that. The next morning, while my roommate and I were unpacking boxes in the kitchen, our elderly next-door neighbors came over to introduce themselves. They were a sweet, older couple who had apparently lived beside the house for over 60 years. At first, the conversation was completely normal. They welcomed us to the neighborhood and talked about how beautiful the house used to be years ago. Then they started telling us about the woman who had lived there before. According to them, the house had been in the same family for nearly 100 years. The previous owner, an elderly woman related to the current owner, had lived there almost her entire life. During the last decade of her life, she became sick and mostly bedridden. She had a private nurse staying with her full-time, but according to the neighbors, the nurse neglected both the woman and the house terribly. The place slowly fell apart. The woman rarely left her bedroom, and eventually she died inside the house. Then the neighbor casually mentioned something that made my stomach twist. Apparently, the old woman's bedroom had been the room I was sleeping in. I remember trying not to react while they told the story. But inside, I was freaking out, because the woman from my dreams had looked exactly like how they described her. Over the next month, strange things kept happening around the house. Nothing violent, nothing dramatic, just constant, unsettling little moments. My roommate and I would both wake up in the morning convinced the other person had already gotten up hours earlier. We'd hear footsteps moving through the kitchen, cabinets opening, dishes clinking around. One of us would finally walk out into the hallway expecting to see the other making breakfast. But the entire house would still be silent. The other person would still be asleep. Sometimes I'd come home from work and find the back door unlocked, even though I knew I had locked it before leaving. Random objects would disappear and reappear days later in strange places. Keys, books, coffee mugs. At night, we constantly heard what sounded like someone pacing slowly back and forth across the back porch. Not creaking noises, actual footsteps, slow, steady, like someone walking in circles outside. Several times we even opened the curtains quickly trying to catch whoever it was. Nobody was ever there. The strange thing was, despite how unsettling everything felt, neither of us ever felt truly threatened. Scared, yes. Uneasy constantly, but not in danger. It almost felt like the house itself was restless rather than evil. As the renovations continued over the following months, things slowly started changing. The old wallpaper got ripped down. The stained floors were replaced. The broken furniture was hauled away. Fresh paint brightened every room. Sunlight suddenly reached places that had always felt dark before. And weirdly enough, as the house improved, all the strange experiences started fading too. The footsteps stopped. The doors stopped unlocking themselves. The pacing on the porch disappeared. The dreams about the old woman never returned. By the time the renovations were finished, the house felt completely different. Warm, comfortable, alive again. Today, if you walked inside, you'd never guess how creepy it once felt. It's honestly beautiful now. Bright walls, polished floors, plants everywhere, music constantly playing. The heavy feeling is gone. And honestly, sometimes I like to think maybe the old woman just wanted the house cared for again. Maybe she hated seeing the place abandoned and falling apart after living there her entire life. Because after the house was restored and full of life again, it finally felt peaceful. And in a strange way, it almost feels like whatever was there before isn't haunting the house anymore. It's protecting it. My wife's parents live in one of the oldest houses I've ever been inside. It's a massive brick home that was originally built sometime in the early 1800s, long before modern renovations or building standards existed. From the outside, it honestly looks beautiful. The entire place has been restored carefully over the years, and if you walked through it during the daytime, you'd probably think it belonged in a history magazine. But the house has a strange feeling to it. Not everywhere, just certain parts. The kind of feeling that makes the back of your neck tighten for no reason. The first time I visited, my father-in-law proudly gave me a full tour of the place. He loved the history of the house and knew all kinds of details about the property. Most of it was fascinating at first. Old woodwork, hidden storage spaces, original fireplaces, thick walls that had clearly survived centuries. Then he showed me the parts of the house most visitors never noticed. Behind several of the walls were hidden corridors, originally built for slaves to move through the house unseen. There were also two narrow hidden staircases, both incredibly steep and cramped. One staircase connected to the kitchen area, while the other came out near what is now the master bedroom. The moment I stepped inside one of those hidden staircases, the atmosphere changed instantly. The air felt colder, heavier somehow. I remember joking at first that the place looked straight out of a horror movie. Nobody laughed. Then he showed me the basement. Now the basement itself already looked unsettling enough. Dirt sections, exposed stone, low ceilings, old support beams darkened with age. But at the far end of the basement was a room with something strange about it immediately. The door only had a handle on the outside, no handle on the inside at all. Inside that room was what used to be the old coal room back when the house relied on coal for heat. Along the walls were old iron eye hooks still embedded into the stone. According to the records they'd found while restoring the house, slaves were once chained there, and their hanging beds had been suspended from those hooks. I remember staring at those hooks longer than I probably should have. Even just standing near that room made me uncomfortable. The final strange area was the attic. Every old house has a creepy attic, but this one felt different. The entrance itself was oddly hidden, almost impossible to notice unless someone showed you exactly where it was. It reminded me of one of those magical hidden rooms from fantasy movies, except this place felt far less welcoming. At first, I brushed most of the creepy feelings off as imagination. Old houses naturally feel eerie. That's normal. But then I started noticing how the animals behaved around certain parts of the house. And animals don't fake fear. My wife's parents had several pets over the years, dogs, cats, even a few rescue animals. And every single one of them avoided the hidden slave corridors and basement areas completely. The first time I saw it happen clearly was when my wife and I brought our dog to stay for the weekend. Late one night, I decided to take him outside through the hidden staircase near the kitchen because it was the quickest route to the backyard. The second the staircase entrance came into view, my dog completely lost it. And I mean genuine panic. He slammed his paws backward against the hardwood floors trying to escape. His legs were sliding out from under him because he was fighting so hard to get away from the staircase. I'd never seen him look genuinely terrified before. His ears flattened, tail tucked completely, eyes wide open. He wasn't growling. He wasn't barking. He looked horrified. No amount of pulling or reassuring would get him near those stairs. The same thing happened near the basement door and the second hidden staircase upstairs. Eventually, I just stopped trying. Then there were the stories from when my in-laws first moved into the house. At the time, they were renovating most of the interior themselves. During that first year, they owned 2 kittens that constantly disappeared in strange ways. Almost daily, they would come home and find the kittens trapped inside large clay storage pots in the pantry under the stairs. The lids would be closed tightly. The pantry itself would still be locked. At first, they assumed maybe the kittens climbed inside somehow while they worked. But eventually, it became impossible to explain, especially because it kept happening over and over again. For a while, everyone blamed the attic for the strange noises throughout the house. People swore something moved around up there at night. I actually managed to debunk that part. I set live traps up there and eventually caught several raccoons living inside the walls and attic spaces. That explanation made everyone feel better for a while, at least until the silver disappeared. This happened fairly recently, and is honestly the one event in that house I still can't explain logically. Years earlier, when my in-laws first moved in, my mother-in-law had found a beautiful set of genuine silver candlestick holders hidden in the house. Nobody knew exactly how old they were, but they were valuable enough that she eventually bought replica versions to place around the house while keeping the originals displayed safely. One day, every single real silver candlestick holder vanished. At the same time, her late mother's wedding ring set also disappeared. Nothing else was taken. Not televisions, not computers, not money. Just those items. Naturally, everyone assumed somebody had broken into the house but there were no signs of forced entry anywhere. A few days later, the furnace suddenly stopped working. Being the helpful son-in-law, I volunteered to help my father-in-law check things out in the basement. So down we went. The basement already felt unsettling enough normally, but for some reason that day felt especially wrong. Quiet. Heavy. As we walked past the old coal room, I noticed something reflecting light near the back corner. At first, I thought maybe it was just metal scraps or an old tool. We stepped inside to look closer, and there they were, the missing silver candlestick holders and the wedding rings, all sitting together neatly at the back of the coal room. Now honestly, if this were a movie, this is where the door would slam shut behind us and some demon would start laughing. And trust me, for a split second, that's exactly what my brain expected to happen. But nothing dramatic happened. No ghosts, no voices, no moving shadows. Just an overwhelming feeling of dread washing over both of us at exactly the same time. Neither of us said anything immediately, but I could tell from the expression on my father-in-law's face that he felt it too. That room suddenly felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain, like we weren't supposed to be there. We grabbed the items and left almost immediately. Back upstairs, we showed my mother-in-law what we found. She barely reacted. She simply took the silver, placed everything back where it originally belonged, and said loudly into the room, "If they take them again, they can keep the candlesticks, but they cannot have my mother's wedding rings." Then she just walked away and refused to discuss it further. That reaction honestly unsettled me more than the discovery itself. Later on, I went back downstairs alone, trying to find a logical explanation. I convinced myself maybe raccoons had dragged the items somehow, or maybe someone in the family misplaced them. But the coal dust inside that room was mostly undisturbed. No raccoon tracks, no shoe prints, nothing except a few strange snake-like trails through the dust. To this day, nobody knows how those objects ended up inside that locked coal room. And honestly, despite all the creepy stories attached to that house, that's still the one thing I truly cannot explain away. This happened a few summers ago when I was around 15 years old. And even now, it's one of the few memories that can still make my heart race if I think about it too long. At that age, my friends and I basically lived reckless, chaotic teenage lives during summer break. We spent almost every day together, usually hanging around one particular friend's apartment because her mom worked often and wasn't home much. Her apartment became our little escape from everything. We'd spend entire days there watching movies, listening to music, sneaking alcohol, smoking weed, talking about stupid teenage drama, and staying awake until sunrise. Looking back now, we were way too young to be doing most of the things we were doing. But at 15, none of us thought we were capable of getting seriously hurt. That night started like any other. A few of my closest girlfriends and I were sitting outside on the apartment porch, smoking and drinking. It had been going on basically all day, and by nighttime, I wasn't feeling great anymore. I felt exhausted, dizzy, and kind of sick from everything we'd consumed. Eventually, I decided I was done for the night and wanted to sleep. By that point, I practically lived at my friend's apartment anyway. So I just went into her bedroom and crashed on one of the couches. Now the layout of that room matters a lot. The couch I slept on sat directly beside the bedroom window, maybe 2 or 3 feet away at most. My head rested closest to the window itself. And the window was one of those easy sliding windows with no screen attached. Because the apartment was on the first floor, we constantly used that window like a second entrance. People climbed in and out of it all the time. At some point, after I fell asleep, my friends woke me up briefly to tell me they were sneaking out through the window to go meet some people nearby. They asked me to make sure the window got shut behind them after they left. Half asleep, I remember getting up and closing it. Apparently, though, one of the girls came back a few minutes later because she forgot something and reopened the window from outside. The important part is this: she never shut it again. I had already fallen back asleep by then and had no idea it was open. Sometime later in the night, I started hearing rustling noises outside the window. At first, I barely reacted. Still half asleep, I just assumed my friends were coming back and climbing through the window again, like usual. But then, the sound changed. The rustling wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the room, right beside my head. And suddenly, something about it felt wrong immediately. If it had been my friends, they would have been loud. They always were. Whispering, giggling, bumping into things. This sound was slow, careful, quiet. I remember lifting my head sleepily and mumbling my friend's name while looking toward the window. And instead of seeing one of my friends climbing through, I found myself staring directly into the eyes of a stranger. To this day, I still remember his eyes more clearly than anything else. Dark, wide, completely focused on me. He had a beanie pulled low over his forehead, almost covering his eyebrows, and part of his face was hidden behind a scarf covering his mouth and nose. His arms were already inside the room, reaching around on the floor near the couch. And his body was halfway through the window. His face was only inches from mine. For a second, both of us just froze, staring at each other. I honestly think I scared him too, because he clearly wasn't expecting anyone to be sleeping right beside the window. Then my brain finally caught up to what I was seeing, and I started screaming. Not yelling, screaming. The second I screamed, he jerked backward out of the window. For one brief second, it looked like he was about to run away completely. Then suddenly he reached toward his belt. At the time, I wasn't wearing my glasses, and my eyesight without glasses is absolutely terrible. So in my panic, when I saw him pulling something out, my brain immediately decided it was a gun. I genuinely believed I was about to be shot. I tried throwing myself off the couch to hide, but fear completely destroyed my coordination. My body wouldn't respond properly. My arms and legs felt numb and disconnected from my brain. Then he pointed something directly at my face. A split second later, burning exploded across my eyes and skin. It wasn't a gun, it was mace. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. My entire face felt like it was on fire. My eyes slammed shut instantly, and I couldn't breathe properly. I remember stumbling blindly away from the couch, sobbing and choking while the stranger disappeared into the darkness outside. By the time I managed to open my eyes again, he was gone. Completely gone. I was alone in the apartment, half blind, panicking, and absolutely terrified. I grabbed my phone and called my friends, crying hysterically, begging them to come back immediately. Their friend's mom was out of town that weekend, so there was literally nobody else there with me. At that point, I genuinely thought I might be going blind because of how badly my eyes burned. When my friends finally came back, they found me curled up on the floor, crying uncontrollably. Somebody remembered hearing that milk could help with mace or pepper spray. So they soaked washcloths in milk and pressed them against my face while trying to calm me down. Eventually, we called the police. And honestly, what happened afterward almost upset me as much as the attack itself. The officers came, looked around the apartment, took pictures of my face, the window, and the area around it. Then, after maybe 20 minutes, they basically decided none of it had happened. They told us they believed I'd probably been having some kind of vivid nightmare or hallucination because I'd been drinking and smoking earlier. Even with the mace burns on my face, even with the open window, even with the fact that my friends believed me completely. The police treated it like a stupid prank call and eventually left. I still remember how helpless and angry that felt. Because I knew what I saw. And more importantly, I knew what had happened to me physically afterward wasn't imaginary. For weeks after that night, I barely slept. Every tiny noise near a window made me panic. I'd wake up gasping from nightmares where I saw those same dark eyes inches away from my face again. Even now, years later, I still struggle sleeping beside windows sometimes. Doesn't matter whether they're open or locked. Doesn't matter what floor I'm on. There's always a small part of my brain expecting to wake up and see someone silently climbing through the darkness toward me again. And honestly, the part that still scares me most is this. That man never got caught, which means somewhere out there he probably moved on to someone else.